Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the Binge Factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I've got a podcaster who I've known a really long time. I was interviewed on his show almost at the start of my podcasting journey. So we're kind of old buddies here. But he has such an interesting niche podcast where it's a really interesting marketplace that is not being served by a lot of podcasts out there, which is why I think his show has been doing so well and been going on for so long. So he's almost at that magic 300 mark. He's got over 275 episodes. Chad McAllister is a PhD, founder of Product Innovation Educators, the host of the Everyday Innovator, which I love that idea that everyone can be an everyday innovator. It's the longest running weekly podcast equipping product managers and innovators for success. And it's that product manager part that we're going to talk a little bit about today for sure, because that is his niche audience, which is really eager for information. He's recognized as a top 40 podcast management influencer and a top 10 innovation blogger. In addition to helping organizations improve the performance of their product managers and teams, he teaches product management and innovation management at leading universities. Chad, I'm so glad we get together again. Woohoo!
This is wonderful. Now you get to interview me after I got to interview you.
That's right. So Chad has actually not only been, I was on his show, but I actually put his show into a couple of my Inc. articles over time because he was there's just so few podcasts out there dealing with innovation at a level that you do. What made you decide that podcasting was the thing? Because you started pretty early on.
I did. It's been over 5 years now, and podcasting was not the thing when I first started thinking about this at all. Not for me or for my audience, right? So the way this came about was an interesting story. In 2013 and 14, my wife and 2 kids, we got into a motorhome, and we spent 1 year and 2 weeks driving around the U.S. And that was just great, right? We were creating good family experiences, seeing some new things. I worked from the internet, so you have internet, you can travel, and that worked out. And along the way, one of the things I was doing was I was trying to reconnect with people that were innovators, people that own companies, people that were developing products, and just had these wonderful, amazing conversations. Some of those were planned, set up as we went. Others were just incredible people I bumped into and just enjoyed so much talking about.
It's amazing what you attract, right? When you're out there looking for it.
Yeah, exactly, right? I was focused on that, and it was really delightful. And my thought was I was going to write a book on this. At this point, I was already helping people with product management and coaching companies, product management teams, and training people on that. But I did feel a little bit disconnected from what was going on in different kinds of organizations, and this was a great chance to kind of find out. And so I thought I would write a book. Got back home from the trip, life gets busy, never wrote the book, but I really missed the conversations. And I thought, how could I have, these continuing discussions take place and at the same time offer value to other product managers in the process? And a podcast seemed to be the logical choice.
I could totally relate. That's exactly our thought process on 3D printing. How can we have some conversations and find out if there's something here, right?
Right.
So yeah, well, that's a fantastic way to start. Now, you started back when it was a lot harder to start. You had to figure all this stuff out yourself. Luckily, you're pretty tech savvy, so it wasn't as big a deal for you. But what challenges did you face back then?
So there's a few things I did do. The challenge. Yeah, working through the technology was fairly straightforward because there was some good advice available at the time. But the personal challenge for me was I'm just really insecure in my voice. I grew up in speech therapy and was in speech therapy through, I think it was 5th or 6th grade, and just really struggled with my voice. And I still do. And I still pronounce words wrong, and that bothers me. And that's life.
Well,
right?
It doesn't show in your show. You don't hear it. It doesn't come through. So,
and all that was just getting to the point of saying, I really do have good information to share, And I know the people I talk to help me as a product manager. And I know the things that I've learned help other product managers. And I just had to get over myself, right? It was like, okay, don't let myself get in the way of trying to bring in some value to my audience.
So you had to talk yourself right out of that and
Yeah,
into
yeah,
the confidence side.
that's it. That's it.
You know, that's the thing. I think there are a lot of people out there who struggle with that the first time they hear their voice and they're like, oh no, that's not good. Who's going to listen to that?
Yeah, it's terrible. My little tip on that is now I have help editing my podcast, but I used to do all that myself for a long time. And I started in Audacity, open source, great tool for editing audio. Now we do things in video. But in Audacity, you can listen playback at faster speed. And so I always listen at faster speed to save myself time, and it makes it sound like a chipmunk when you listen at faster speed.
So you were like, it's not really my voice anyway.
Exactly. It's perfect.
I love that. Yeah, I never listened back to my own episodes. I always had an editor. Thank goodness, because I don't think I would have produced the show. So that's a really great tip. So if you're editing your own show, do it on double speed. You'll get over the sound of your voice, and you'll just be able to deal with the things you really need to edit. I love that. That's a great tip.
Works well.
So, how did you find reaching out to the audience and letting them know, those product managers, that you were there? Did you have a community already? How did you get the show out there and promote it? I think that's one of the hardest things for most podcasters.
Yeah, and it's something I would still love more help with, and maybe you and your group can help me with that some in the future too, because it's grown very organically. So in the beginning, I had people that I had served before, primarily through training and coaching, and that was a pretty small group of product managers. And I put the first episode up, and I think within a couple weeks, 100 people had listened to it, and I went, wow, that's a lot of people listening to me just saying what this thing is going to be about. And then it's an interview format because I wanted to continue those great conversations I was having and share them with others, and so they could actually hear them as well. And so the interview format helps a lot. In the very beginning, I think the hardest part is actually just trying to find people that will want to be guests for you because you have this new podcast and there's some faith that this will grow into something that's more meaningful. And I reached out to people that I knew, people that I thought would be really good, try to convince them. And a couple times I donated to their charity to help, convince them to be part of this.
Well, that's a really great way, actually.
Yep. Yep. Little things you can do. There were some people that I had taken classes from that were really good and could contribute, and so they were easy to ask as well. And then it kind of builds up organically with people sharing more and more. The thing that was easiest for me so far to help promote it has been LinkedIn. And
LinkedIn, well, and I think that's really great in your category. I would have suggested that.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it's very straightforward to search for product managers on LinkedIn, and I just send them a connection request and simply say, I have this free resource that product managers listen to. If you'd like to have the link, here it is, right? And that's pretty much been the most active promotion I've done. We've done a few Facebook ads, but LinkedIn works well.
Yeah, I would think Facebook isn't quite the right place for your audience. LinkedIn makes a lot more sense. But, that's the thing is, so you're letting people know about your show at the same time. You're possibly getting great guests at the same time,
right?
Because they're already the right audience. They might have great stories to share and tell. So that's wonderful. So did you make a bunch of mistakes at the beginning? Almost all of us have, like, that you found were just, you can look at them now and go, oh, that was such a rookie error. I can laugh about that now. But thank goodness, like, I learned from that.
I'm sure I'm making some of those mistakes still as I go. I had some good help in the very beginning. So there's a couple of things I did. One was Andrew Warner, who has the Mixergy podcast.
Yeah.
So he interviews startup founders, and he helps the startup community a lot. He had a course at the time, back in 2014, called Interview Your Heroes. And it was all about how do you do interviews of people that are your heroes, and if you want, turn that into a podcast. And I did that with him. I think it was, I don't know if he ran it more than once or not, but I was one of his students. And coincidentally, then Andrew was one of my guests. I think he was episode 7 because of that. But that was very helpful. That gave me a lot of structure. So I did my homework up front. There were some other things I did. There was a creative live class that Alex Bloomberg put together. I did that at one point. So I went out and I did.
So you studied. I
studied up before I did it. Yeah. I tried to find good people that were doing well at this and learn from what they were doing.
Yeah.
And
well, let's talk about some of your tips. Yeah, let's talk about some of your tips. So what have you found over time? You mentioned LinkedIn, maybe you can dive a little bit deeper, but ways to book great guests.
Great. And just to preface this, one thing I really enjoy is I get to talk to these amazing people, right? This frankly is the best thing about a podcast. I'm kind of like
That's
the
right.
little boy in the candy store, right? It's just, you could have conversations that otherwise I would never have gotten to be able to come to. And one thing I really enjoy though is after the interviews, so often the guests will say, "Wow, this was the best interview I've done," right?
Oh, that's got to feel good.
Oh, it's great. Or they'll say, "I really loved how you prepared me for that interview. It was just so easy." And I think that kind of planning helps a lot to go into it, and then making them the star and just be comfortable talking, right? This is just having a good conversation is what it's about.
So making it a great experience actually helps you
Yeah.
book other guests, because if they hear that, they understand the result of that.
Yeah, it helps a lot. So finding guests now is really easy, frankly, because once it's a niche. There's not a lot of product managers podcasts out there, and so people are coming all the time asking if they can be part of the podcast, which is wonderful. You don't start that way at all, right?
No.
So before
None
it
of
was a
us
lot of
do.
work.
Keep that in
No,
mind. Yeah.
exactly. And it would be me going to the coffee shop typically on a Saturday morning, and I would search through Amazon to see who has published something recently and see if there's a guest there that I might like on a
I
topic.
love that we haven't heard that tip before. So looking on
Oh.
Amazon for the newly published authors,
Mhm.
that's a great idea.
They're easy to get to say yes, right? Because if they have a book that's coming out, they're looking for places to talk about it.
Yeah.
So that worked well. I would also go back to LinkedIn. I would search for LinkedIn for specific kinds of expertise and reach out to people to see if they could be part of the podcast. I also looked at existing conferences that are coming up or that just were recently held, and reach out to them and say, hey, could you share that topic on the podcast? And so I try to find people that had reason.
Well, that's a really great tip right now, because if the speakers spoke at recent conferences, they got to be looking, they've got to have a little more free time on their hands right now amidst everything that's going on with COVID-19.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're more likely to get them to show up on your show now.
Yeah, people are looking for opportunities to do something online.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Those are great ideas. What about increasing listeners? What have you found that has worked at least a little bit for you?
Yeah, it's something that I need to give more attention to, frankly. So the LinkedIn
You're not alone.
I know I enjoy doing the interviews so much, and then we all have other work to do too, and trying to promote it is another story. So I do find LinkedIn as a helpful resource for that. So that's probably been my main go-to for increasing listeners. I always ask guests to help promote it as well. I've tried different mechanisms to make that easier for them, and I haven't just seen a big difference in it. So now I just really ask them to promote it, give them the link, and let them do what they're going to do. In the past, I have tried creating graphics for them and preparing everything so they could just run with it. I personally haven't seen a big difference one way or the other, but certainly asking for their help to promote it is a good thing to do.
Yeah, you might as well ask, right? If you don't ask, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
Producing in a professional way. You now have a professional editor, but what other ways do you make sure that you give high production value to begin with?
So I am a stickler for audio, and I can control my side, and then I always try to help out the guests on their side. And we still are constantly looking for new systems to make this better, and waiting for the next better system to come out. Just like you, we tend to do this over Zoom now. I record my audio locally, so I get the best quality from that. Sometimes the guests can do the same. Usually we're just grabbing the signal from Zoom, and it's not as good of a signal, but I figure if listeners are listening regularly, at least I hear my sound's always the same, right? And it sounds decent because it's local. The guest is always different, so I think they're more tolerant of the guests.
I would agree. I think your audiences are more tolerant of, if it's a really good guest, they're not going to care but it's always hard to control that.
Yeah. So try to get good, clean audio, at least on my side, and something reasonable. And I help coach the guests through that. In the past, I have at times actually sent a microphone to guests.
There you go. That's productive.
And I encourage them to be in a quiet environment, and I encourage them not to use Apple earbuds because it's not.
I agree with that one.
Yeah. It's actually the laptops are better, right? Just use a laptop, or
Yeah.
even if you have to do a phone over Zoom, that works well too.
Yeah, great tips there. What about encouraging engagement? Do you have a community that talks to you? Do people message you back about your show? How do you encourage that?
Yeah, so it's not something I'm particularly focused on a lot, frankly. Thankfully I do get messages back through LinkedIn, and I occasionally get the email about a question that has happened. There is a place that I promote during the podcast some too, where people can sign up for time to talk with me, right, about different things. So I get some of that going on too. More times than not, and I'm starting to do this a little bit more actively, at the end of each interview, I always ask the guests, how can this basically be a win for them? I ask them, how can we find out about your work? How can we find out about your book? Whatever that is. And for people, if they want to reach out to you and thank you for being part of this, how do they do that, right? And they'll often share their LinkedIn profile, or maybe if they have their own website, to go there on a contact page. And I'm starting to hear that more from actual guests who say, hey, a handful of your listeners reached out to me and thanked me for being part of that.
Oh, so you're hearing engagement on that side.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, what about ways to monetize the show? So you've been doing this a while. You're about to hit your 300, your magic 300, which is, well, where for those of you who don't know, that's where your 301st episode, your very first one, will drop off of iTunes. So you have to have a plan for that. But other than that, there's no magic to it except that you could lose your first episode if you're not aware of it. But it is kind of it's kind of a magic number because not a lot of shows get to 300. So
Right.
have you looked back and said, I feel like I really got a return on investment from this, or I need to monetize this more? What are you thinking on that?
Yeah, so I need to monetize it more. In the beginning, I was that kid in the candy store. Like, this is just the best thing to get to talk to these amazing people, and I'm having such a good time with these discussions and getting to bring that to my audience to serve them better too. And that was my only focus. This was me scratching my own itch. And then as time went on, I do have my own products for training product managers, and I go into companies and I help them and their product management teams get better at becoming higher performing product managers. And so I have started using my podcast to advertise my own products. So I sponsor, in that sense, the podcast myself. I am thinking about having sponsors join at some point, maybe in the near future. And the key reason for that is because I get this specific question some of the time, like, how do you pay for the podcast? How does that help you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of makes that, like, guests never pay to be part of the podcast, right? I'm trying to find people that offer value. And I think if there's clearly a sponsor on the podcast, that actually helps eliminate some of that question, like, how is this? Is there anything odd here going on or not, right? But monetization is primarily around me advertising my products.
Definitely. Interesting. So, I think you're not alone in that. And so this is kind of where I usually point out your binge factor.
Mhm.
So most people cannot think of their own, but have you discovered people are binging on your show?
So I don't know how much that is happening. I have found out something that I just love. When companies engage me to do work for them to help their product management teams, a factor is the podcast. I've heard that in the majority of cases where they, not just that they discovered me through the podcast, which happens a good part of the time, frankly, but the other factor is, we want our teams to have some kind of continuing education mechanism after we get done, you helping us. We want to keep learning. And there's teams out there in companies that will, take maybe one of the episodes each month and say, hey, this is a good one for us to discuss. And they'll get together and have a lunch and learn meeting over the topics that we talk
Wow.
about in the episode. And I just love that, right? Because I started it to help people with product management. And now there's groups of product managers finding value in that.
Oh, wow. You could almost make a custom list for them too.
hmm
Yeah. I like a
There's some
custom
things in
little.
the work for that.
Yeah, I love that idea. That's really great. Well, that's a great find though, that
Yeah.
it not only is it helping you get the job, but it also is helping you, that continuing support after the job, which,
Yep.
you then don't have to provide any kind of one-on-one. So frankly, you're not out extra labor to keep those touch points going.
Hmm.
So that's a really good find. Well, this is what I found about you. So as I listened to hundreds and hundreds of shows over the time, I probably upwards of coming on 1,000 different shows that I've listened to both interview here and because of our clients and because of what we do. And I've discovered patterns going on in the shows that create a bingeability to it. So yours is that you are so deeply in a niche, but you are an expert in this niche. So when you ask questions, and you mentioning that you actually took preparation and took courses to learn how to interview really shows. I mean, you can really hear it in the questions that you ask, but your questions are asked from a very informed position. So this is not a dumbed down 101 product
Right.
manager type questioning. Like, I don't know anything about it. It sounded like a really great niche. I'm going to use my podcast to explore this topic, right? No, it came with deep experience. So when you ask your question, they're framed from that advanced position. So if I'm a product manager, I'm not getting the silly question. I'm getting the question I wanted to ask. And that is why they will go back and listen to multiple episodes and binge on the show, especially if they're somewhat new to their job too. So like that's where those new product managers or the ones who are feeling like they're in an unproductive team, they have an opportunity to better themselves through binge listening. That's where your bingeable factor is.
Well, I
So,
appreciate the feedback, and that helps me have great discussions, right? And that's just why I love doing that so much.
yeah.
Another factor that kind of surprised me actually was some people have emailed and said, I just find your podcast so inspiring. And the first time I heard that, I'm like, really? Because in my mind, it's all about helping you skill up, right? The thing I'm always thinking about for my podcast is I want listeners to walk away at least with one thing they can put into action right then. It's like, I can do this to make myself a better product manager. But we always close the podcast episode the same way by asking the guests for a innovation quote that they like and why do they like that. And I do that because I just love innovation quotes, right? And I love people's perspectives on innovation quotes, and I just want to get more of them. And that was something that people have connected to. And some people tell me they listen just for the innovation quote and how we talk about that quote.
That's fun. And you're getting them all the way through to the end. So that's really
great.
smart there. Now, are you using them in social media? Are you putting them out on
Oh,
Instagram and Pinterest?
Tracy, you're going to kill me. So
No.
not
Well, there
only
you
am I
go.
not using them, I did pay a social media person to go through and take some, excuse me, some nearly 200 of them and put them on images and get them ready to go out. And we haven't done it yet.
Oh my goodness. Well, I just did an interview on, we do this Marketing Money Mixer on Facebook every Monday night at 4 o'clock Pacific time. And so I interviewed Hanny Mora of Repurposed IO, and they have a really easy way to drop in audio or video and like go right to the clip that you want. So if you went right to your end question, you could go straight to it and you could clip that into an audiogram and use that audiogram on LinkedIn.
That's perfect.
Right? Because LinkedIn requires an under 10-minute video.
Right.
But video does really well on LinkedIn right now. And so your little segment at the end is going to be inspiring. And then you can make a throw to listen to the full episode here and put that in the post. So that's a great way for you to repurpose because you got a lot of episodes that people need to find. And that, excuse me, that's the other challenge when you get up to 275 and you get up to that magic 300 is you've got lots of really great episodes, but they're buried sometimes in the middle and people don't find them because they're old to you, but new to them.
Right. That's a great tip. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I've been looking for ways to do that.
A little online mentorship here going on.
Right.
So, both ways. I love that. So, Chad, you want to keep going. Obviously, you feel that value in it. Mm-hmm. What do you think is that driver for you? Is it really just the interviews? Is it just the return of being able to get future clients? What has really been the what's keeping you going?
Yeah, if I didn't like doing this so much, it wouldn't be happening, right? Because you know what this like. Everyone that's listening or watching this thinking about doing a podcast knows you're getting into something that's takes some time, right? And you have to work through that resistance. But I just love having the conversations, and that keeps me going. And now it's really encouraging getting to see how it's helping some product managers. And I've had some amazing stories that people have sent in. Like one guy said he had not had to find a new job in 20 years, and he started interviewing for product management jobs and was really not doing well in them. And he said, it was listening to your podcast that helped me figure out how to better position myself. And I've heard that one several times. Like, I know how to better
That's got to
position
feel really
myself now.
good.
Yeah. And one person that was a listener, and I helped a little bit, she was able to almost double her salary because she's changed companies and was able to package her work differently and went after a bigger role. And it was because of a lot of the concepts that came out of some specific episodes. And that was just really cool.
Well,
It's fun to see those stories.
That's really great when people can see the success factors that others are pointing out and say, I have that. And it builds their confidence to a point at which then they go out and they ask for a raise or get a new job. That's really valuable. That's got to feel so good on your end from a show standpoint and on the impact and the ripples of what's going on from the show. I know that's the whole thing. Is really, for me, it was really hard to let go of a show when we stopped doing our 3D print one, because I knew there were these ripples of people who are learning from it, who are doing it. But we had reached just a saturation point at 560 episodes. So we knew we were kind of done with that. But we went that far because we really didn't want to, we just loved that impact that we were having too. So I can relate to that. So now, I like to send people to one of your episodes just because I want them to listen to the model of how you do it. One that you think is maybe one of your better episodes. Which is one of the ones that you are very proud of? Like you're proud of the question, you're proud of the guest, you're proud of how it turned out.
So you put me on the spot, right?
I did, right. And I try to because I don't want you to over-prepare. I don't want you to overthink this, right?
I'm going to pick one that is very applicable to my audience of product managers and innovators, and also for anyone else that wants to listen. So, and that happens to be the current one. So maybe it's top of mind right now. But it's, if you go to the everydayinnovator.com/275, you'll find it. And it's with a gentleman, Jeremy, who did recently write a book, but his thing is reframing problems. And as innovators, we have two things that come up. We often jump into a problem without actually truly understanding the problem, and we solve it too fast. And it means we're solving the wrong problem. And sometimes we can actually find a different use for a product we've created already and make the product just go wild because we found a new use for it. So reframing is a really key thing for us. But for anyone that ever needs to solve a problem, and I think that's all of us, backing up from that problem for just a moment and thinking about the problem in a larger context probably can make it a lot easier for us to solve the problem, and also help us know that we're solving the right problem and maybe not just a symptom of something else that doesn't really help us.
I was listening to that episode as I was preparing here because I always listen to the most recent one and then work my way back through spot episodes to check it out. And I wanted to see if your show had changed over time, which, it got better, but there wasn't really a lot of change in format, which I appreciate because that's a comfort zone for your audience who probably really wants that. But what I heard in that episode too was that idea of reframing. What I thought was really so important is those sometimes we get like the forest for the trees kind of thing, like we don't really get that stepping outside of it. And by forcing a reframing thought process, we step back and do that. And ironically, this morning, I was just doing that same thing with my team where they were complaining about some things that were going on, and they were giving a solution that I thought, this is a Band-Aid. This isn't telling us why this is going on. And I can see this, the more clients we get, the more magnified this problem is going to be. So now is a really good time for us to ask those reframing questions. So I just used those skills immediately and applied them. So this is when you have a great show like that, that's really the power of it. So yeah, check out that latest show from Chad McAllister on the Everyday Innovator. And you'll find all the information for Chad at our blog post for this episode at thebingefactor.com. So you'll be able to find all his information. Make sure you connect up to it. And we'll link to that specific episode. So you'll be able to find that one right away as well. And, hey, I might throw in the one that I did too, just even though that one's really pretty old. But, people can listen to some old stuff on me as well. So anyway, as I should, because we should always re-promote and relink, because now it would be a link back from a different website than I've ever linked to you before, which may help your show. So you never know on that. Well, Chad, is there any other tips of wisdom, any great knowledge, any advice for aspiring podcasters out there?
So for people that have been doing this for a while, I'll share the experiment that I'm doing right now, and that's having an online summit. And this has been planned for a good 4 or 5 months, and it just happens to be coincidentally at a time, at least that we're recording this, a lot of things have moved online. As people
Thank goodness, right? That it's timed right.
Right. And I'm doing that because I sincerely want to serve this community more. It's kind of like the podcast on steroids. We're getting together 24 fantastic, top of the world, real experts to share their information in a concentrated fashion. And I'm also hoping that it will add some listeners for the podcast, right? And help out more people that way too. So it's a good experiment. We'll see where that ends up. But I think that's a useful thing to try too. If you've been podcasting for a bit and you want to focus some attention on it, maybe a virtual summit.
Mix it up, try something new. Love that. What about someone who hasn't started at all yet?
I would, my advice is just to take that little bit of time to think about how you're going to get into this, right? And so there's the technology side of it, and there's great resources for that. One that I came across is Pat Flynn has a free tutorial. Yep. Right. It just makes it super simple, right? Do this, and you're set. And keep the equipment simple. Don't let that get in your way. You can record on an iPhone. You make this really easy and don't need anything complicated. But then the key thing I think is think about how you want to communicate with your guests. And when you're making that first communication, that kind of sets the tone, right? Do you look professional? Are you sending out a message that they say, yeah, I want to be a part of what you're doing, right? And think about what that message is. And don't spend too much time because you got to get going, right? You put too many obstacles in your way and you're not going to get going. But I think it's useful to spend a couple hours on, okay, what is that message? What is this about? And how, if I was approached by someone,
about it.
Yeah, if someone approached me to talk about these things, how would I want that message to come to me? So yeah, just think about it professionally as if you were going to be approached. How would you like to be approached?
I love that. That's really great advice. Chad, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be here.
So everyone out there, thebingefactor.com is where all the information on Chad, the Everyday Innovator will be. It is a great show. You really got to check it out. It is deep in a niche, so maybe all the advice won't apply to you, but you got to check out the shows because there's so many different things of all the shows that we're bringing you, aspects that you can listen to and you can relate to, but also as a favor to the podcaster, when you listen to it and you go, I know my uncle is a product manager or my sister is, go out and share it with some people that you love and can use and value the show. So do that as a favor to Chad for him sharing his tips and wisdom with you today. And I would really appreciate that as well, because we want to get more podcasts, get greater circulation, and get these great tips to raise the level of podcasting for all of you out there in the industry. So I'm here at the Binge Factor. I am interested in interviewing new podcasters every single week. If you are a podcaster, you've done 25 episodes or more, please apply. You can do that at bingefactor.com. You can send me a message on LinkedIn or send me an email. You can also suggest someone, right? Let me know who you're listening to, who you think is a great podcaster. So if you haven't started your show yet, but you want to reward a podcaster that you've been listening to for some time, send them my way. I'd be happy to give them some free publicity. Because remember, it's not only the Binge Factor, but it also goes into Authority Magazine and eventually into BuzzFeed. And doesn't everyone want a little bit more publicity for their show? So all of you out there, I thank you for listening, and I'll be back next week with another influencer on the Binge Factor.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.